and then it's there, just as you are, just hello and welcome. This is episode 116 of ADSN Audionautic Deep Space Network. My name is Curtis, and we are here today. It's Eonlake's interview episode. How you doing, man? It's lovely to see you.
Hey, dude. I'm good, thank you. I am very good. Unfortunately, our friend Sunwarper isn't, and we'll be missing him tonight. But get well soon, bro. Hope you're feeling better soon. And on we go.
Very much so. The show must go on. Sunwarper is a bit sick. We would hold a minute's silence, but then dead air on a radio show is not the best thing in the world. So we'll just send off submissions.
Big love.
Haven't seen the bro in a long time. I think in the longest of times since Audionautic. Haven't seen him for a whole week, which is a long time. So missing him. Maybe he's watching. You never know. But yes, it is episode 116. It is the interview episode with Eonlake today. Eonlake released Beyond Polarities last week. So we're going to be sitting down, have a look at some project files, having a look at some mixing. It's going to be great. Oh, okay. So apparently I'm very quiet, but Eonlake is very loud. So I'm going to turn myself up. We're going to make that work. Is that better? Thank you, Sleeping State. It's nice to know. Sleeping State is in here. It says, Eonlake, congrats on the new album. That's fantastic. Hello, we've got Abby in the chat. Hello, Abby, who is on holiday this week, on vacation, as the Americans would say, which is nice to see. We also have Bendu in the chat as well, who's at work. Everyone's at work today. We got Shady. Hey, Shady, nice to see you. We got Smiling Arrows in the chat as well. Lovely to have everyone here. Such a turnout for your interview episode, Eonlake. That must be quite nice to feel.
It is, yeah. I'm going to have to try and be interesting now.
That's not going to be too difficult to achieve. You are a very interesting fellow. Also, I missed that as well. We have FCC. Haven't seen FCC in a while. Hey, you're right, Paul. How you doing, man? Lovely to have you here. If Sunwarper is watching back, if anyone wants to say hello to Sunwarper, he might catch it, and I'll pass it on later on in today. But yeah, Eonlake, it's been a while since we've seen you. What have you been up to, man? You weren't here last week. What's been going down?
Well, apart from taking a little bit of downtime, I've been messing around with hand pans and droning and stuff like that in my spare time. Got one I might send your way, actually, because I thought you might like it. But yeah, it's funny looking back at the album stuff. I realized how much I've torn my studio up a bit, because when I'm recording and mixing, sometimes some of the synths are still playing live. I've not recorded them, and I've nicked a bunch of them and put them over on my play tray so that I can noodle around with different setups. And yeah, it's only once I started trying to play back old files, I realized half the sounds are missing because the gear's over there now. So yeah, it seems like I'm slowly pulling the studio to bits and rearranging it. I really must have a sort out.
What about you? Though. I think when you're in that creative flow at the same time, when in my head, I wake up, say usually my big sessions are on a Saturday night, for example, right? They wake up Sunday morning and there's just cables everywhere, and that's when you're in that flow state, when you're just jamming stuff in left, right, and center, and that's the most creative time, isn't it? Really? Yeah,
and you don't stop to do things neatly, or at least I don't. It's an absolute mess in here. I'd never film below this level because the cables on the floor and stuff is not good.
Exactly. There's a reason the camera is facing this way. You don't want to have a look over there. It's all for the Instagram generation. Frequency Control Center has gin. It's a very nice way of accompanying ADSM this evening. We were saying as well, it's going to be a very British episode or English episode for the two of us. There's no Sunwarper here. And then Frequency Control Center comes in with gin. It's like, yep, there we go. British all the way. It's very nice. Thank you, Frequency Control Center.
I hope he's not playing the Audionautic drinking game, though.
We have to see how that goes. I've given up the beer for a few weeks. So I have to see how that goes. But Bendu says, congrats to Eonlake on the new album. Really love it. It's great to see.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's gonna be nice. It's been a week. We're gonna get into your we're gonna get into the nuts and bolts of it later on. But it's been a week. How do you feel? How do you feel about it?
How do I feel about it? What about the release?
Yeah.
I'm
album.
very glad that it's out there. I've been sitting on that a while, as you know. Yeah, it's strange because I'd kind of forgotten about it a bit because it was quite a while ago now that I wrote and recorded it. So I have been reacquainting myself with it a little bit, and some of it has got to the point where I don't actually remember how I did certain bits, and it's kind of been fun listening back to it and going, oh yeah, I liked that bit. I remember why I did that now. It's funny getting reacquainted with something that you lived and breathed for a while, but then managed to sort of distance yourself from and forget about. And I must admit, I like it better now that time has passed. Not that I didn't like it when I did it, but I think, I had the usual sort of doubts about it not being maybe perfect. Whereas now it's just like, it is what it is. It's something I did. It's a snapshot in time, and I can see it on its own merits a bit better, I think.
Fair play to you.
So I'm glad it's out there.
Good man. Yeah, I think it's a good way of putting it. I think they're all snapshots in time, and when you're up against it, you can't see the wood from the trees. But we made it. You made it quite a while ago. It's been sitting around for a while. Taking stock. So yeah, that's awesome to see. On the name of drinking and on the name of being playful in the episode, Smiling Era says, I nearly made an Audionautic bingo card for drinking, but realized in that regard would make us drunks of us all.
Yeah.
As if we weren't already. That's a good way to go. Should we get into the show today? We've got a little piece on Behringer and a nice little discussion on Behringer before anything else. Unless you've got anything else to say before we dive in?
No, let's see. I'm curious about this one actually.
Fair play. Well, I will bring it
No
up
more.
straight away.
Mm.
I'll bring it up straight away. So yeah, this is Behringer. This has gone into mass production. It's been around for a while, but they've started shipping now. This is the Behringer SY-1 or the Syncussion 1. Which is, if I find my notes, basically a complete and utter rip-off of, hang on, where my notes are. Here we go, start the show, yes. It's the Syncussion 1, which is a replica, they say, of the vintage Pearl Syncussion SY-1. And it's now shipping. It's 2 drum synth voices with 6 oscillator modules, including a single oscillator, FM dual oscillator mix, dynamic oscillator, FM noise mix. And the whole point is that it's meant to recreate the traditional sounds of the 70s synth drum effects. It can be triggered by drum pads or sequenced using MIDI or analog gate signals, which is really interesting. And as they say, it's only going to go for $199, basically $200 essentially. So yeah, it's started shipping now. With Behringer, there's always a bit of controversy around it. But first, what do you make of this, Eonlake?
Well, it's one of those things that I think I know what I'm talking about, and then I find I don't. Even when it comes to my own opinion, because on the surface of it, I look at something like this and think, what I don't want is an analog percussion machine. I don't have a need for one. I'm not that fond of the sounds that they make, and I've got a million samples of similar things. So I think, this is not for me. This is not particularly useful to me. Not something I'd want to spend money on. And then somebody does a demo of it, and it makes a load of filthy, rude noises. And I go, oh, hello. You're talking my language now. So
I'll tell you that. I'll tell you what. Seeing as we've got this here, let me play this, and we can see if that's exactly the self-fulfilling prophecy that you have brought up to the table. Let's see it. So yeah, this is the SY-1. I'll just play it. There's a little sound demo at the end of this from Behringer, and then we'll talk about it. that there for now. So that's just a little what they got there before we get struck with the copyright or anything like that. Dirty noises. I'm assuming that you heard that because I didn't, being the operator. But yeah,
I did. It was quite dirty as well. So I mean,
Was
the
it
first
dirty
sound
enough for you?
was like some filthy square wave thing with a filter on it, and it to me it sounds more like the Moog DFAM than what I was expecting. I was expecting something like what's the Arturia Drum Brute, something like that.
Which the one?
Something a bit more sort of synthetic hi-hats and the usual sort of sounds. And maybe it does that. I don't know. You'd have to dial it in, obviously, because it's not like a preset based thing. And for me, that's actually a good thing because it looks more like something I would use, in the sense of I've been making sounds like that with modular and using two oscillators to one to be a carrier signal and the other one to do FM, and getting some clangy and twangy sounds that way. So it's one of those things. I thought, oh, I don't want that, and then you pay a bit more attention. It's a bit more up my street, to be honest. I don't know if it's something that I can't already do though, or necessarily need the hardware for, but I do quite like the sounds it can produce, if I'm honest.
That's fair. I think you're in good company as well. Frequency control center is nice if you make industrial techno, and a bit more up your street, perhaps. Smiling Air sounded interesting. I definitely run it through more noise. He does also have a caveat to that, which actually came before, is but what is the pedal? What is the machine? I believe he's referring to the notion that we're running it through a TC Electronics
Got a reverb,
reverb
right?
pedal.
Mm.
Yeah, which is an interesting one, but you seem to be in good company in that regard.
Yeah, and I like the idea of a small thing that's desktop size you can stick a pedal next to and just make a racket and create some interesting sounds with. And I'm trying to do more of that myself and develop longer, more evolving sounds that way. So yeah, I don't know. It's just a bit of a surprise, that one. I mean, the response has got to be split into two things, because there's just the product itself on its own merits, and then there's the Behringer argument, the discussion that we've had many times and continues to be had around the world. And I was reading on a Discord only the other day, because of the Buchla thing that they're talking about putting out. And I must admit, it remains as thorny a subject as it ever was, and I'm still of two minds myself about the whole thing. But I don't know if we want to go there today, do we?
I don't know. I mean, if you've been part of the show for a while, we always have this thing about Behringer, about the moralistic question about whether they should be making these knockoffs, and we kind of arm and R. Usually, in my experience, depending on how good it is, if that makes sense. If it's a naff knockoff, then it's like we kind of get a bit anti-Behringer. But if it's a good one, it's there. I know. Again, I see this from I was looking a bit in research ahead of the show, and the Pearl. I was unaware of the original SY-1 from Pearl, and I did some research. And currently, it's about £1,200 secondhand on eBay, that kind of thing. And this is $200, which is fine. And again, similar to you, I'm not sure I would put. Currently right now, I've got the monologue in front of me, and I kind of like it being there. And and the I don't know if I'd want to spend $200 on it, but I would use it as an educational tool, which I think that's kind of where I'm kind of simmering down to this notion of keeping that alive, if that makes sense. Like, none of the kids I teach would know anything about, for example, Pearl back in the day, or the original SY-1, but I could bring them this on a pretty decent school budget and go, hey, look, this is how you make synth drums in the 70s and 80s, for example. For that reason, I'm down.
I mean, for that, do you need hardware, do you think? It's a bit more boring sitting clicking on screens, I must admit. It's certainly a bit more visceral with the real thing. But
I hear you. I think especially an educational tool, I think you need that hands-on. And
Mm.
I can't down here, right? There's a reason why this is here and this is here this week and this is over
Right.
here now. And that's because down underneath the camera here, underneath my microphone, is a push 2. And I took stock of a push 2 in the week. I've been playing around with it, and I didn't realize just how integrated with Ableton it was. I mean, obviously it's an Ableton box, for example, but it does everything, right? And I haven't looked at the computer screen in so long now, and that's really liberating. So to bring coming back to the Behringer, to bring that hardware to the kids and to bring that to someone who's getting into this kind of thing, again, tactile response, turn the knobs and watch things move, like that's integral, I think. I believe that's
it's
more important.
best, definitely. I don't know. I suppose it's whether or not you can engage sufficiently without it. Possibly not. I mean, you would know better than me, right?
When you say engage significantly without it, what do you mean?
Well, clicking on screens is a model of another thing from yesteryear, and it sounds different. But, you know, I think if you only ever see a virtual instrument on a screen, you know, they probably seem more samey than they might in the flesh.
I think so, yeah. I think that's very true. I think if you're working, a lot of the producers and the younger producers are working completely inside the box, and that's totally fine. But I wonder if it's a case of also understanding about where it comes from. I think that's important in education, to understand where things come from in that regard. And like, you know, all these kids are learning about, like, for example, Skrillex and Fred again and stuff like that, and all the popular sample based musicians, right? But they don't know anything about Aphex Twin, one of the biggest pioneers. And I feel maybe this is just a personal thing, but that bridge needs to be gapped. At the same time, the hardware that we used in the box now used to be this physical thing that people used to have walls of and stuff, and now it's in museums and things like that. And I think you do have to keep that alive, I think.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you. Yeah, I know if I were learning, I'd want to know about it all.
Yeah, exactly. It's about knowing everything, isn't it? So we'd have to see in that regard. So yeah, we'll have to keep going. So yeah, let us know what either watching back or if you're in the live chat, what you thought about it. Kind of a lukewarm approach in the chat today, live, but maybe that'll change later on down the line when this goes up on Saturday. Behringer rage is warming. I wonder if that's a very ominous comment from Smiling Arrows, and I wonder if that will be mirrored as the week goes on. You know,
I wasn't sure what that meant. Does he mean it's warming up, that it's growing and becoming more prevalent, or does he mean that, you know, in the cold winter months, you know, it can keep you warm when you can't afford to put the heating on? Just rage a bit instead. Either way, I don't disagree.
Yeah, exactly. You just read an article about how Behringer ripped something else off, and that anger just flows within you for the winter months and keeps you going. That could be a good way. He says that it warms his soul, so it must be a good thing in that regard.
I think that's something called the Lars factor, isn't it?
You broke up a little bit. Say that again for me.
That's the Lars factor, I think.
That is the Lars factor. Wonder where he is. He's probably on Threads somewhere shouting at someone, which is totally fine. If you're watching this back, Lars, we hope you're well, buddy.
Yeah, thinking of you.
Yeah, very much so. Yes, if you are watching back, if you have seen this on Spotify or on Apple, or listening on Apple Music, let us know what you think. Tune in. And tell us what you think. Is it right that Behringer doing this? Do you think the SY-1 is worth even making a copy of in that regard? Be interesting to know.
It does feel a bit niche, doesn't it? I mean, you know, our comments have been like, you know, great for industrial techno and, you know, stick it through some more noise, which is always a good idea. But yeah, I mean, how flexible is it? Is it something that needed to be copied? And as far as the anti-Behringer arguments go, is it exclusively to do with ripping off intellectual property? And by that measure, is it okay if these things don't exist anymore? Or, you know, is it more offensive to anyone if those products are still available from the original manufacturer, albeit for more money, etc., etc.? You know, what are the conditions, if you have an opinion on it? let us know.
We're always happy to know. I would love to know. It's all about community, this place. So thank you very much. And speaking of thank you ever so much to our patrons. It is you. There's many of you in the show, in the chat today, or listening through. Thank you ever so much for your support. We really appreciate it. You tuning in each week. It's really cool. It's awesome. It allows us to stay independent and allows us to keep doing this without sponsorship or anything like that. And it helps us keep this place going as we grow and as we kind of get bigger and there's more going on, bringing new releases out on the label every month, and doing more with the show each week even. It's the patronage that you guys give us that allows us to keep doing this. If you're listening to this show and maybe you're new and you like what we do and you want to help us support, you can just head across to patreon.com/audionautic and make a pledge there. They start as $2 a month. And from that, you're instantly into the patron extra service that we have. We have a hangout once a month where we're chatting to each other, that kind of thing. And as we go up, we give out freebies, sample packs, early access to our content, that kind of thing.
Chance to join the show.
Plus to join the show. I keep forgetting about that one. Yes. Our patrons come on for the second half of the show during the round robin or in the second half of the segment, whatever that would be. If that sounds like something that'd be up your street, come down and make a pledge. We are up for renewal on this platform, i.e. StreamYard, which is the platform that allows us to do, firstly, fancy stuff like moving cameras around. As you can see, I can zoom in on Eonlake, for example. I'm making do this thing, which I'm going to do a lot in the coming segment, which is, okay, that's nice. It's a good aesthetic. But also when it comes to things like screen sharing, and in a bit for the next segment for the interview, Eonlake is going to be showing us his Ableton project file, which we couldn't do if it weren't for things like StreamYard. We are up for renewal, and we're trying to gather the funds to make that happen. If you want to see the show continue in its existing form, where we can do more of this kind of stuff, let us know. It also helps with the post-production side of things as well. We cut all this stuff up when we make it available on social media after the show. If you want to see more of that and you want to keep that going, consider coming down to Patreon. Patreon.com/audionautic. Anything more on that? Because I've got the stuff about the community challenge, Eonlake.
No, I would say that we appreciate everybody that spends some time with us and listens to the show, though.
Very much so. Thank you ever so much. For those of you, I haven't mentioned the Discord yet this show. This is a good time to do it. We are in the thick of our Discord challenge for this month. Secret sample, as it's been lovingly coined. The first stage is through. So anyone participating, that's cool. Thank you ever so much. We have all your samples in a drive. Sunwarper and I, when Sunwarper comes back into the world of being well again, will be dishing them out. We hope to do it by next Wednesday. So a week from this broadcast, we'll be giving everyone their sample. And then July 24th is the submission date for that. So that, I feel, is going to be a lot of fun. Are you playing this round, Eonlake?
I'm being cautious about dipping my toe in because I don't want to say I am and then not do it. But I do want to. It definitely appeals to me, this one.
Good on you. Well, there's still time. I will say, if someone wanted to slip through a little sample before the weekend, not going to say no to that. Not taking it too seriously. This is a community challenge. This is where we're coming together just to try new things, keep ourselves some sort of like idea of making something. Doesn't have to be finished, doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't even have to be anything that you would release. It's just about exercising the brain and creating something in that regard. We had a great session last month where we made something outside of our normal genre, and we had some really interesting submissions. This is just about taking a sample from someone else who you don't know and flipping it into something completely different. If that sounds like your game, come down to the Discord. While Eonlake says something else when I finish talking, I will put the Discord link in the description.
Think of something quick. What I found interesting about that last month's one was not just the different genres that people decided to do stuff in, but also the way that it revealed how they hear that genre. When it's something different, it's like it's still a person's individual take on that sort of thing, and it's funny how much of the character of what they do carries over into it, despite the fact that it's something by its very nature that's deliberately different. It's pretty interesting in that regard, I thought.
It's for sure. I mean, it's very interesting, and something so profound when I just basically threw you the mic for a couple of seconds while I could do something else. Nice one. Loved it. Yeah, incredibly so. I have just put the Discord link in the description if you want to come and say hi and get a part of that. It is, yeah, completely and utterly. It is about community and seeing how different people work and how different people make music. And like you say, how people hear the music that they make, which is really interesting because, sometimes we forget that we all have a filter and we all hear music through our own filter and to kind of see how it's gone. Frequency Control Center says, would love to do the sample swap, but all the dates have fallen wrong for me. Definitely in for the next one. That is absolutely no bother. No problem, FCC. We're going to continue doing these, we think, because they're a lot of fun. So there's always room for next time.
But remember, it's fun. It's not homework. It's just a laugh.
It's just a laugh, exactly. We don't want to take ourselves too seriously. It's playful. It should be playful. That's the way it should be. And that's what we're striving for, playfulness. Yes. Right. The moment has come. The time has arrived. Eonlake, it is time. I know that you've been looking forward to this and you are not anxious about this whatsoever. So let's rip that band-aid off, shall we? Beyond Polarities was released last week, came out Bandcamp on Wednesday, and it's been pretty much universally lauded, essentially, for quite rightly so. And today we're going to go through go through a project file. I've got some questions and the community, but yes, want to bring it down to it. This has been out for a week. It's been out for a while. We touched on it recently. How are you feeling?
Quite buoyant, I think. Yeah. I'm happy. I listened back to it and I didn't decide that I hated it, which is always great. No, I listened back to it and I thought, yeah, it is what I thought it was, if not better. It began to feel a bit more like an old friend than, something that you've been pouring everything into. It takes a while to, pull back again and to have that that perspective. So, yeah, I like it. I'm glad it's done. Like the artwork. Who did that? That's really nice.
Absolutely no idea. I have absolutely no idea whatsoever.
Very nice.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can talk much more easily about other people's work.
It's easy to talk. It's easy to talk praises of other people's work. It's difficult to talk about your own, and that's fair enough. Completely. I'm being coy because I made the artwork, and we're just going to scoot over that and come straight back to the music. Frequency Control Center says, "I know that feeling, Eonlake." That notion of coming back to your work and not hating it. I think we're all familiar with that. To some degree. The notion of, again, once you take a step back and you see something with a bit more of a fresh face, you can kind of get nostalgic about it, and it becomes, like you say, a snapshot in time. So my opening question to you, before we go into the project file, I'd like to say, what is this album conveying, or what is it you're trying to convey, or not trying to convey, as many people might say? What is it about?
That's a good one. So the way I tend to write about things, I have this belief that the muse is kind of elusive. A music, or at least the music that I'm trying to write is kind of, sort of comes from within, and some of it is not. Some of it's subconscious, and so there wasn't a theme before I started. I wrote a bunch of stuff and started generating a lot of material before an idea and a theme started to develop. And really, it's kind of like a collage of different sort of mental and emotional states and things to do with, being alive, giving a damn about stuff in general, and being human on this planet in this time, and the kind of mental processes you can go through, the emotional states that you can get into, and how also at the same time, from my meditational practice, which I know you do a bit of as well, there's this concept of how when you're trying to still your thoughts, the way you do that is distancing yourself from them, observing them, almost like they're happening to somebody else, or like they're clouds passing or something like that. And the concept that the individual that is feeling all of those things is somehow separate to them, and more than that, it's very easy when you feel something strongly to own that, and you talk about your sadness or your happiness, or in the possessive sense. And it's how there's a concept of something that's much deeper and richer than that, and this is kind of like the ripples on the surface. And the reason it's called what it is that it's kind of that concept, and the fact that it was something that Ram Dass mentioned in one of his lectures about beyond all polarities I exist. It's about how this stuff can be distractions. But yeah, it's kind of like a montage of those things, and a reiteration that there's this identity that is greater than those things. And it's also a bit of a parallel between I mean, you could argue that songs that you write when you're a producer are similar in a way. They're kind of analogous to the thoughts and feelings. So yeah, it kind of seemed to fit as the thing developed. So I went with that.
It's a great thing to go with. I wanted you just to carry on talking forever. It's something that really resonates, and you can kind of see it coming through. Like the way that the album flows in that regard. It's very consistent and very of that trajectory. And yeah, I know you keep it vague and you keep it there, but there's this notion as you listen to the whole thing. It is an album. It's not like a collection of singles. It's meant to be listened from beginning to end. At least as I took it. And yeah, that meditation on the self, and that meditation of going and exploring your different emotions, bearing witness to them, taking a step back and processing them in that regard. Yeah, it's a lovely thing to write.
And also, now that I come to think of it, polarities between being very much in yourself and feeling something, be it positive or negative, and kind of the opposite of that, those times when you feel that almost like time slows down, a period of like great contentedness where you feel a connection to the more abstract, the more universal. Maybe when you're happy and contented and just enjoying life, that direct experience of feeling in tune with everything, as opposed to the other experiences of being very much up in your own head and about your own issues and the internal dialogue that's always churning, and how those two things are kind of opposites as well. But it's all part of our nature and part of being alive.
It is completely. It's all part of our nature and being alive. And I mean, like I say, it has been utterly well received. I mean, Lewis gives it the highest compliment that I think you can give the internet these days. 3 fire emojis, not 1, 3 fire emojis. So that very much sums it up. But yeah, completely and utterly. Now, I wanted to give you the opportunity to open up the project file, which you've got sitting there waiting. The rest of my questions, and it seems to be the questions from the community as well, come in from production, but I want to give you a chance to bring it up first. I'll say now to the chat and to anyone watching live, if you have any questions for Eonlake as he is here, please put them in the chat. We are here, and we would love to have a discussion and have more of an insight into kind of this beautiful album as it is. So any questions that you've got burning, fire emoji or otherwise, put them in the chat.
Okay.
Very much so. So while Eonlake brings up his project file just from FCC, all of those things help create music, but music can give you all of those feelings as well. Very profound. Yes, this idea of this kind of like cyclical nature.
Absolutely. Yeah. Kind of a feedback loop in a way, one expressing the other.
Which is really nice. Also, your hair is fire, man. Yes, Eonlake had looks like he had a haircut just before coming on. I think that is it's bare hair fire. That's what it is. It's all about. So yes. There we go. Here we go.
Right.
This is the project file for what song? Tell us about what have we got here, Eonlake?
This one is Rise. This is the first track. One of the more positive sounding ones you might think. And it kind of is as far as I'm concerned. It represents a little bit of an evolution for me in the sense that it's not as many tracks as I usually do. Please ignore all the first, I think it's 8 tracks. Yeah, the first 8 tracks are just there for me to bounce stems out. I don't actually use them, so it's actually just mainly what you see here, which for me is pretty light. Also, if you look at the whole thing, it's quite audio based, this one, and that's because I did a lot of flattening things and putting things through weird effects and keeping them, and it was a deliberate decision to make decisions that you can't undo and just move on. Well, one of the things we wanted to talk about is mixing and trying to get clarity, and I think this is probably one of the better ones to demonstrate any of that. And the first point that I wanted to make is that basically the easy way to do this is to have it as your rationale from the word go. Is not these parts that you write have to fit together and have to complement each other. So if you start with that in mind and you build your track, and you make sure things occupy certain frequency ranges, certain panned places and certain depth, then you can make everything generally sit in its place. But the mixing is more of a tweaking of that, slight sculpting, and placing and balancing and so on, rather than taking a load of material that hasn't been considered maybe enough and trying to make it work together. That being said, there are a number of things that I've done in this, so perhaps I should just talk about a few sounds and play some stuff.
Yes, let's do that. Sorry, I was muted. Let's start there.
Yeah.
Great place to start.
So this one started with there are a few little modular sort of arpeggiated bits that I will play at some point. That's generally what kicked it off. That and the bass drum that's like a Underworld style rolling kick. I also wanted to write something not in 4/4, so I wrote it in 7/4. It was on my whiteboard for something I had to do, so it was also there's also an output of that. So are you hearing this?
Chat, are you hearing this? Let us know, please.
So initially I started with this bass drum, which does that all the way through and deliberately doesn't move. A number of drum loops on top of this being the main one that was written on a Roly thing, a software instrument, and bounced. There's another one that will come in later. What else can we play now? It's just synths at the moment. Let me bump it along a little bit. just bringing in pads at this point. The idea is that we've got a solid with something very low at the moment, something lower mid, quite warm, quite spacious. And now the drums. So the main drums are a drum rack that I use very often. It's got the Sonic Academy kick plug-in for the bass drum, a lot of EQ, compression, a little bit of reverb, more compression, and more EQing at the end. And this is the one that's killing my processor more than anything. But I also took that and ran it out through a lyra to get a bit more juice out of it through an analog delayed and overdrive circuit, and that sounded like this. So this is the filthy version of the same drum track. It's got more sub on it and is very noisy. I've done a bit of a trick here to make it sound more rhythmical because it's just too noisy, where I've used an auto pan to introduce some stuttering, some filtering, and I've got an LFO that is tweaking a beat matched rate there. So what that does is it takes it and makes it sound choppy again, because I brought the noise floor up so much. It started to drown out the mix, and it started to fill up too much space. So this is sometimes something that I'll apply to any element that starts to get a bit too thick, a bit too washy, and I can start to make it rhythmical again. So the LFO is just tweaking that. The LFO itself is beat matched, but it's deliberately not something that fits easily into one bar, so that it makes the pattern repeat more over several bars. And then a little bit of delay just to make the hi-hats have a few little ghost notes in there. We have a bass sound here coming off a K2, which is very low and dirty, and deliberately subby, so that it can sit with these drums. Everything happening now, apart from the hi-hats and snare, is still quite low. There's a lot of space between them vertically for other instruments to fit in. And it's in between there that we start slotting in all the pads and everything that will make it gradually build up to a wall of sound before the end of it.
Oh, that classic structure to it as well.
So we've got a mixture of sculpting sounds and also sort of slotting them into each other. Not to play the entire song while we're sat here. Another thing that I tend to do on all of my channels, if you look at this part here, is if you look at any of the classic mixing consoles through the years, particularly things like the SSL-G series, one of the things that they introduced was limiters and compressors and EQ on every single channel. And that's something I tend to do in my project arrangements. I've saved the standard MIDI track, the standard audio track, with a compressor first, an EQ after, and then a glue compressor after that. I don't always use them, and they're turned off by default. But with anything that I want to start shaping, I'll switch that on and just give it a little tweak, a little nudge, just to tighten things up as I go. So the other thing that I wanted to mention as well about mixing is, I've mentioned it before in previous shows, and I started to move away from a reset and starting from scratch for mixing, and just mixing as I go and mixing as I write. And I found I didn't think it logically made much sense, but it works better for me. I found that if I tried a reset and I just started from scratch and mixed just raw stems and started putting on effects on again, it always lost something. It always lost something that I liked when I was writing it. So I find, you know, the vibe and what I like about it is preserved better if I just mix it as I go. So once the song's written and the arrangement is done, mixing is straight after that, and it is balancing, leveling, using all of these things that I put on every channel. And when I go to the master channel, I've got a mid-side compressor that I created where it only compresses the center channel, and I get that to sit on the low end so it doesn't poke out too much. There's a glue compressor as well. I don't always use that. It's usually just the first one, and a tiny bit of EQ on the mix, because I find, because of the amount of reverb and delay that I use on all the washy sounds, I tend to get peaks in the upper mids. So if you look at the, I do EQ my effects returns here. Not all of them necessarily, but I definitely have on that one, because I tend to get peaks in the middle here, and I've got a tiny bit of EQ on the master bus. I've also got a clipper and saturator there, and a Drama multiband compressor that isn't actually turned on at the moment, but I've got that on the master bus as well. I mix into these, but I switch them off when I print a track. The idea is, this is the sort of thing that I would do on mastering, and it's to have an idea of what it will sound like once these sort of things are applied. So I tend to mix into compressors and limiters, and then I do usually remember to switch them off before I print it. There have been a few times when I've forgotten to, and yeah, had to go back and do it again. But these are the sort of general things that I bear in mind. So I mean, mixes are, they're part of the evolution of the song itself. They happen as the song does. The song's written with the mix in mind. There are standard tools I use on every channel to some degree or another. And there's a standard approach I take both on the master bus, on effects returns, and then it's all of the usual, you know, tricks that you've probably heard of, reducing it to mono and listening to it on one speaker, listening to it very quiet and seeing what the first thing you hear is when you turn the volume up, turning it up really loud and seeing what becomes uncomfortable at high volume, only briefly, and other things like that. And generally, I tend to like what comes out when I listen to it somewhere else. I am using, also I've mentioned this before in previous podcasts and so on, but I'm using a plugin that corrects. I mean, look at the amount of correction it's applied. But these are my speakers. I measured them with a microphone, and it flattens out their response. And since I did that, my mixes transfer a lot better, because I'm able to hear it a lot better. I've also got another setting for my headphones, but it's not loaded at the moment. But yeah, good monitoring is key, because if you can't hear what it sounds like, you'll be chipping away forever.
Very fair.
Kind of what I planned on talking about.
I like it. There's a lot here to unpack, and I've got questions. There's some questions that you've actually answered, but I've also got more. But before I get to me, we have a question from Smiling Arrow straight off the bat in the chat. He says, "How much do you wrestle with wanting each part to have novel sounds versus needing enough repetition for the listener to not lose their way when following the piece?"
Wow, it's a really good question. Quite a lot, actually, but I tend to wrestle in the opposite direction. So what I'm trying to avoid is, sometimes when I listen to certain types of music, I can almost see the progress bar going across an arrangement of blocks. I can hear loops and stuff, and I try to get away from that in what I do. To some extent, obviously a certain amount of it. I mean, you can't deviate from a pattern if you don't establish a pattern in the first place. But I'm a bit funny about that, and it is a big consideration for me. That's sometimes why I like to I like to have different lengths of patterns so that they interleave a lot. That's something I do quite a lot. I like using polyrhythms on drums so that, you know, you've got a mixture of like a 2-bar loop, a 4-bar loop, a 6-bar loop, you know, and maybe I like making them odd when I'm constructing sections as well. Like, you know, I'll use 13-bar loops to get 26 or something, you know. I've actually got a spreadsheet I did that has all of the numbers so that I can see where the repetitions would be if I had a certain number of bars to a pattern, so that I can see at what point they'll cycle and start again.
I'd love to see
So
that.
yeah, I think about it a great deal, basically. I like to keep it novel. I like the sounds to evolve, but obviously the parts need to have a lot of they need to have the pattern in there, but I also try and put a little bit of change in them so that they're not exactly the same, you know, in the way that a real musician, I say as a drummer, would do if they were playing a guitar or something like that, about intonation, you know, trying to add a little something to it.
So it's a difficult balance to strike, that notion of keeping something enjoyable and something that you can latch onto while also remaining novel in that regard. You know, like it's a difficult balance to strike. Do you feel like you strike it well in that regard?
No,
No, that's a
no,
shame.
I'm my own worst critic. I think I'm getting a lot better at it, and I'm a lot better at it since I started recording albums. I mean, some of my early stuff does drive me nuts, and I don't like to hear it anymore. I think I've come a long way, but I think I'm still on the journey, and always will be to some extent, you know. And that's part of, you know, trying to find your sound and your potential and exploring the possibilities, isn't it? I don't think of destinations so much as, you know, the journey. That's what it's about, really.
It's fucking like Ramdas himself, really. If you think about it. Which is
Yeah,
fair,
it's a good
in that
question,
regard.
that. It's almost
It is a
like
good
I can
question.
see it in my head.
We have more from Smiling Arrows, which we'll get to in a bit. It's yeah, it's a difficult one. I'm similar in my regard. Like the earlier stuff with the loops and stuff like that, it can drive you nuts. And I think you have to do that. You have to kind of go through that in order to come out the other side of it. I think it's a balancing game in that regard. Which brings me back to the mix itself. I want to bring this back up for a sec. And we've talked about your mixing process, and we've talked about mixing with intent, i.e., if you want to have a clear mix, essentially, as far as I understood it, and correct me if I'm wrong, this notion of be intentful, you know, if you're going to put something into a mix, use the correct frequency, or go by frequency, for example. Don't just or don't necessarily just bung them together, that kind of thing. Is that fair?
Yes, but there are other things that we can do. I mean, some things that I've noticed along the way and picked up from other people is if you use subtractive synthesizers, like, you know, the East Coast style ones, then you have this ability to sculpt sounds so that they fit into tracks better. So the standard tools back in the day, when it's just all guitars and acoustic instruments and so on, is to use EQ and compression and stuff. Whereas with things like synthesizers, there are elements of how the sound is made that enable you to change it so that it fits better in a mix. So, you know, you can change a patch slightly just so that it sits better in the mix, and so that certain frequency ranges are more dominant and so on, be it with, you know, the type of waveform that you're using or the type of filter that's applied to it, various other things like this. One of the things I've got on the mini log over there in one of its modes is an inversion setting, which will, if you play a chord, it will sometimes play a different inversion of the same chord and shift the notes up and down. So sometimes I write a chord pattern and then I mess around with that to see if other inversions fit better. Sometimes I actually do it properly and move notes around and say turn the chord upside down, take the root and put it on top, and things like that, so that they fit together, you know, better as a, if you imagine it's a bit like a, I think of it like a vertical jigsaw, but it's also goes out to the sides and is deep as well. So I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, but yeah, blocks that actually fit together, and try not to overlap stuff too much.
When you are overlapping, for example, are you utilizing the classic things such as, for example, sidechain, envelope followers, etc.? I know recently you've been getting into envelope followers to create movement and texture in your tracks. Yes, there is this notion of synthesis to fit to a certain frequency. Do you utilize these classic techniques as well?
Yeah, I do sidechain sometimes. Not as much as you think. And sometimes I do something that works pretty much the same way, like using an oscillator to duck. Like if you're doing the old dance thing of sidechaining to the kick and the kicks fall to the floor, you know, you could do a very similar thing with an oscillator that's beat synced, and you can just use that to duck a sound so that it doesn't get in the way of the kick. The thing about using a compressor and a sidechain is the whole envelope thing. If you tweak it right, you can get it to really work around, you know, the tail of the kick so that it's, you know, they're perfectly sculpted around each other. But, you know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Yeah. And envelope followers are, it's something that I used to like gating synthesizer pads a lot. You know, maybe I've listened to too much psytrance, but I do like gated synth pads. And envelope followers can do that even better if you've got a really good drum pattern, and you've got like the tone of the drum, you've got your initial transient, you've got a tail. If you use an envelope follower mapping that to a pad, you can get a more musical sounding sort of gated effect, and you can dial in how much of it you want. And it's a good way of taking, like, a lot of my tracks in the early stages just sound like turn into a big mush. And so I end up sort of sculpting things out, you know, not everything plays at once. Some things start to get more rhythmical and less, you know, sustained. Some things get a little bit drier, lower down in the mix, and the higher frequencies tend to get more spatial effects and so on. There's a deliberate sort of separating, but it's going with the nature of the sound and sort of pushing it a bit more in that direction, just to get everything out of each other's way a bit.
Things move in that regard. It's good to have things that move, which I suppose adds to the notion of texture in your mixes, because when you've got things that are coming in and out, or they're moving in and out of phase, for example, or, you know, they are gated to some degree, you're inadvertently creating texture on top of for example, a flat synth sound, for example. So that can add to the excitement of your tracks. I find, at least, it adds the excitement. Instead of, you know, playing a four chord or 4-bar chord progression, sorry, getting tongue tied there. You know, you're utilizing different notes and different lead lines and different arpeggiated, all coming together and all communicating with each other, so they flow through as opposed to on top of each other.
Yeah, and I also like the old thing of, like, if you don't want things clashing, don't necessarily have them play at the same time. Do you know what I mean? You can drop certain notes out and have them play in between each other, and I sometimes like, you know, the rhythm and the interplay that doing things like that can introduce, and it keeps things a little bit cleaner at the same time.
I get that, for sure, most definitely. What in the creation of Beyond Polarities, is there any particular, maybe there's something in this project file, is there anything in particular that you're either proud of, maybe that's a big word for something like you're proud of, or you're you were interested in creating, there was a eureka moment, or is there something that you've taken from the making of this album that went, oh, that's pretty good, actually?
I wanted to write the different songs in different ways and start with different elements, and that worked pretty well. So the reason why I've got the first 8 tracks, you know, that are used as groups, and I send all the relevant sounds to bounce out stems, is because the rest of the arrangement is completely different on each song. So it's not always sort of like kick, snare, hats, guitar 1, guitar 2. The structure of them is completely different. And so, and they may be loops, and they may be sat in the middle of the track list rather than at the front, and, because they come from different things. So I like the fact that it sort of produced some different feelings, and it kept me from wigging out too much. And I'd do them in batches of 4 that I would cycle between the songs when I got too bored, or when I felt like I got to the point where, it's not going anywhere anymore. You've done enough. Just move on to the next one. So cycling songs and doing them all differently was something that I liked. There were a few little quirky effects that I really did like that I did on this, and using the Lyra's distortion circuit and delay circuit on drums is one of them, because it really came out with a filthy strangled drum loop, which I had to end up tidying up a little bit in the mix because it was just a bit too extreme. And there's also the clean channel as well as the dirty channel for the same reason. It was almost too much. It's messing around and finding things like that is one of the things I enjoy about writing music. Apart from the the melodic and the harmonic content that gets me started, sometimes it's the crazy noises that keeps me going. So I'm kind of happy with all of those elements. I like the fact that there's plenty going on. I like to think of my stuff as headphone music, so I like there to be detail in it and things moving around, so that you do actually get an extra dimension out of hearing it properly.
I appreciate that. I'm just making a note of what you say. It's the crazy noises that keep me going. I want to put that on a
It's another t-shirt, surely.
I want to put that on a t-shirt. If anyone would like a t-shirt with that, let me know and I'll make one. That's great. I like that. It's the crazy noises that keep me going. Full of wisdom there.
Come for the music, stay for the crazy noises.
One more question from me before I throw it over to the community for now. And like I say, if you are listening and you have anything that you want to ask Eonlake, please put it in the chat and I'll read it out as we're going. The reason I've brought this project file back up is I see a lot of Ableton stock plugins. For example, the glue compressor, the compressor, the EQ.
Oh yeah.
And stuff like this. There's also a utility on there as well. My question to you in regards to your production is, do you find yourself finding for these dynamic plugins, are these usually stock, and is that for any reason? Are you experimenting, or is it just that this track happens to be using these stock plugins? Do you have any particular reason for using those?
Yeah, I do. So it's partly the philosophy of like the traditional big studio mixing console, where you've got that compressor and limiter and EQ on every channel, so you've got that control over every sound, and also the 2-stage compression, where the first one sits on the peak a little bit and then the second one actually compresses it a bit, so you're not trying to do it all in one go and get these like pumping sounds that don't sound great. So it's partly that philosophy, but I do use others. So on the master bus, that's the one that's got the the fancy saturator on it, the clipper, and the Drama multiband compressor, which I'm using tons these days. I actually sometimes dial that back a bit and print the mix with it as well, because it's just such a good way of controlling dynamics in the 3 ranges without hearing it pumping. It used to drive me crazy hearing compression on a mix. I really don't like to hear compression on a mix unless it's that sort of brick wall guitar thing, with like indie rock and other forms of rock, where it's just a deliberate wall of sound. I don't mind that, but if you can hear it pumping on a track and it sounds in any way amateur, it really irritates me. A multiband, just that Drama one's awesome. It will control all those frequency ranges, and they pop at different times, and it would just tidy things up. So yeah, I use stock plugins for doing light general work, and then I use favorites for the heavy lifting and the important stuff. It's always a mixture. And for anyone drinking, there's always Valhalla Supermassive on every
Yay, there
track.
we go.
That's for Portland's gin.
Exactly. Yeah, a couple of things. Again, Smiling Errors, not the dirty channel. I'm not quite sure what that's in reference to. Maybe you know, Eonlake, in that regard. And he also says printing equals export ? Which
Yes.
that's
Yes.
as far as I
Sorry.
take it.
Yeah.
Taking a stereo print or
Actually
something
mixing
like
it down and exporting it. Yeah. Sometimes I leave the old multiband on, but not at the same level if it's just a mix, because you need it. It's definitely a good idea to do that stuff separately so that you can tune it and you can backtrack and all sorts of things like that. But as a monitor, it can be quite useful. I found in the past there were mixes that I quite liked, but then once they've been mastered, the nature of them changed significantly with the noise floor coming up. When you're using really lots of massive reverbs and a lot of spatial effects, bringing that up can really change. It can change your balance a little bit as well. And so, from that point, I started mixing into them and then bypassing them just to export the mix.
I think totally fair. I think in a similar vein, just to branch off of that, I've found that these days less is more, very much so when it comes to effects and stuff like that. I mean, there's obviously room for your Valhalla. Everyone take a drink now, please. But like there is very much this idea of, instead of putting it at 40-50%, sometimes, again, if you've got a lot of channels or something like that, 10-12% is enough, because together they come together. And Sunwarper, as my mastering engineer, he makes it loud, and that's great. He makes a good loud master, and it really changes the way he mixes. And
yeah,
that's not a bad
I
thing.
gave him a
You
hard
gotta
job
take
with
into
that
account.
particular one as well, because because of the distortion used in the track. You compress it too much, and it starts to sound like really fuzzy. And like you've done that, but it was all in the track.
Yeah, for sure. So it's an interesting. That's why I enjoy mastering with Sunwarper so much, because it really does. It gives another edge to your game, and you have to kind of counteract that in that world. And so yeah, it again, coming back to the notion of intention in that regard, or mixing with intent, being mindful of the final piece of where this will go. Frequency Control Center raises his glass to you. Cheers, bro.
Yeah.
Hope you're doing well.
Valhalla.
It says here, Smiling Errors again, mastering really messes with music that includes noise, bumps into weird space, which is
it really does. It helps to be mindful of that and how much of it is going to happen. Yeah, I mean, I've had it in the past. I've liked the effect, but I've been concerned by how big a difference to what I expected it was, and that. Okay, it sounds good, but it wasn't deliberate sounds good. It was like accident sounds good. Yeah. I wasn't comfortable with that.
You got to be mindful of it, I suppose. For me, it's a lot of, especially if I'm using a lot of Foley work, or if there's a lot of soundscape stuff, especially that low rumble at the end, that can really be elevated. One to bear in mind. Another question from Smiling Areas, this time from the Discord channel before we went live. I'm throwing up to the community now. I'm just putting it in the chat so it's here and I can bring it up. But Smiling Areas says, when you are creating patches with your analog setup, do you sample as you go or sequence it and build a track around
it? There's an easy answer to that one. Yes. Yeah, it's both. It depends on what it is. So Rise has got a bunch of analog, a load of modular stuff that was running, because I started off with the 7/4 thing on the sequences in that, and for a long time it was just running alongside Ableton. I've got it patched around so that it just comes in. I can hear it. It's all synced up. And when there was enough of the song, once I had the structure down, then I did a take of it, because I messed around with it as it was playing so that it changed in the right parts of the song. But sometimes I will just sample it, and sometimes I I don't use a filter in the Euro rack because I know I'm going to stick an auto filter or something on it once it gets into Ableton. You know, there are a few little considerations that make me think about whether or not I'm going to record it or whether or not I'm going to sample it. Yeah, because there have also been a few like modular jams where I've done something, I've run out of voices, so I've had to sample some of them and then play those so that I could repurpose what originally made them to do extra bits. And then I will kind of I'll record them separately into Ableton and finish the job in there just because it's quick and easy. There are other ways of doing it, but I don't really want to elongate the creative process and sort of lose the vibe in finding them. There were some other things, like there was one track that I did mainly on the OPZ. All the drum loops and bass and the main synth parts were all on that. It's the second track on the album, Spiralism. And that I just took all the loops and everything and the ones that I'd chopped up on the little tape machine on it and just put them all into Ableton because it's a lot easier to arrange it all in there. And then I did everything else I could possibly think of. And then found it was too much and took half out again.
Yeah, that's part of the creative process at this stage, really, isn't it? It's about going.
Yeah,
going
I mean,
too far
it definitely follows both approaches, depending on what it is and how fundamental it is to the track.
I get that completely and utterly.
Another great question.
That was another great question. Yeah, for sure. While you were talking, we were joined by Asef Stripe. Hey, Asef Stripe, patron. Wonderful to see. He says, "Congratulations, Eonlake, on the release," which is lovely.
Thank you.
It's nice. It's nice to see you, Asef Stripe. Hope you're well. Let us know how you are. If you've got any questions for Eonlake, pop it in the chat. We'll read it out. Yeah. Is there anything more on that, or should I go to my final question? I do have another community question for you as well.
I think I'll leave it to you as to whether or not I've been waffling on too much or not.
I mean, I could listen to you talk all evening, mate. It's fine. This is nothing directly related to the track itself. I think this is more of a yeah, it's not about the album per se. I think this is a little intrigue, but it's an interesting one. It's from the community. Put it out on an Instagram story earlier today, and this is from Prod Mish, and he says, "What is your take on bootlegged tracks?"
Depends if I'm doing them or not. Well, actually, yeah. I mean, I suppose the answer to that is a little bit of it depends on whether I'm somebody just listening to it. I used to love hearing mashups when people took two songs that were in the favorable keys and just mashed them together seamlessly. It's really interesting. Bootlegging, it's become so much easier now, hasn't it? I think it's quite a creative thing to be doing, especially if you're a producer, for practice and working on your chops. I think it's really good, and it's like sample flipping. It's a really good musical exercise, and I think also some people, again, it depends what you do with it as well. Some people are really creative with the way that they repurpose parts of other people's music, and I'm quite for that. I dare say we get into a bit of a legal minefield when you talk about releasing it and selling it and stuff like that, but I think there's a world of fun to be had, and like most things, you could probably do it really badly too. It's probably as open to abuse as any other thing you could do in music is as well. So yeah, I suppose it depends on whether you're a listener or whether it's your track that got bootlegged. I don't know. I think it's fun though, and it's certainly something I'd like to do a bit more of. Definitely, especially now it's easy enough for me to do.
Yeah, especially with stem splitting. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It can be a lot of fun. There's a lot of intrigue to be had, I think, in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, you could really have some fun with it.
You can completely. To bring it back to the album, then, there's been a bit of a process with this. We released it last week. It was going to be out When originally was it going to be out? Was it going to be the end of last year? Was
Yeah,
that the idea? Is
yeah,
that yeah? So it's been there for, and so with that process, obviously that needed before the original release date. You would have finished it a while back before then because there was a long
yeah,
process and that kind of thing. So you've been sitting on this for a while. And obviously we've been talking back and forth, when we were doing the artwork and we were just talking about the album, that kind of thing. How much of this sound now speaks for the Eonlake universe, and how much have you drifted since then?
I've just did a bit. I'm trying to make the things that I'm doing now and have done since this more deliberate and more based on, ideas, specific ideas. And that's going quite well. I'm also trying to layer less and have more movement in parts, as they develop and treat. I like to think of like a song being performed by like a whole bunch of me, it's like 18 of me all doing. One's playing an MS-20, one's playing a Sub 37. I think of them almost like in stop motion, like doing all of these things. So the idea is that it's a band, but it's a band of like multiple me's playing a song, and trying to make it a little bit more like a song that's played and less more like the computer is more like a tape deck and less like a sequencer, if you see what I mean. That sequences come from the hardware more, and that Ableton's more being used just to capture everything from an audio point of view, or recording MIDI as if it was audio, just to play back on synths while I'm doing something else. And that's working quite well, I think.
I think that's fair. I mean, I like this idea of this, one-man band of sound, so to speak, and it's like you're trying to compartmentalize and almost limit where you're going to pace on how many instruments you have physically in the room with you, as opposed to just rotting up a load of rack instruments in that kind of thing. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm also trying to do a little bit more of what I did in that track, where there's a bit of sound design where I'll flatten samples and put effects and bounce them and so on, so that I'm starting with something that's kind of quite heavily colored and a definite vibe and can't be undone. That's it. You've got to go with that. And I quite like that as well, rather than when I first started, I wanted to have everything so that it could be undone if it needed to be. And I was a little too uptight about everything. And I think I like to chuck some of those rules out on occasion now and to be a bit more relaxed about it, not take it quite so seriously. It seems to work a bit better. It feels a bit freer, not quite so, regimented. And also it's much easier on the CPU.
Oh yeah, for sure, most definitely. I think there's again, it's about we talk about creating limitations, don't we? And when you freeze something out, when you bounce something down to audio, that's it, and that's where it's stuck. And that's a good thing, because then you have to work with what you've got in that regard. And you are not having that option to go back means you must keep pushing on. You must keep moving forward. And I mean, if we got to go full circle and talk about, the meanings and some of the stories, but in this album, this notion of, continuing down your path, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, again, you've just hit upon another reason why I thought, oh, well, then the name fits even better then, because that did occur to me that it's all related somehow, and it felt like, maybe I thought of this in my subconscious. Maybe it's just an accident. I don't know, but it all feels, it's like synchronicity. Feels right somehow to do that and move on.
For sure, it's it's almost in that flow state, that creative space, isn't it? Like it's almost the way I see it, been seeing it recently, because you've mentioned this a few times now, and I've started incorporating it more into my production as a result. The It's almost like if you're in that flow state or in that creative space, it's honoring that creative space to bounce it out and just to kind of keep sticking with it, you know. It's maintaining that authenticity in that space as well. Like I've been doing a lot more stuff in the sketch station over there, for example, and to get some stuff from over there to over here, quite literally, it has to be bounced out and put over here for now. And I kind of like that, because then I have to, at that point, I have to stop that session and start it in another session. And yeah, I suppose what I'm saying in a roundabout way is, yeah, it's a process in that regard. I think there's a lot of freedom, to borrow your phrase, in that, because once it's done, and you have to work with that, and there's no point getting overthinking. It's a barrier to overthinking in that regard.
Yeah, and it probably suits you as well, because I like to think, and I've been doing the very same thing over here on my little, assorted toys desk. It's just generating material, just literally experimenting and just coming up with stuff you like, generating loads of that, and then when you sit down at the big desk, with all the gear, and then you can really have fun, and it's a bit more like remixing in a way, or at least having some pre-made content to start with. Works really well. I don't know why that separation works well, but it just seems to.
Increasingly, I think it's I don't know, it could be in my case, it could be my ADHD, or it could be something along the lines where I need that novelty to come through to keep that creative spirit going. I think if we, like you say, sometimes you'll bounce through a couple of tracks in a session, for example, or something like that, or you'll try and change things up each way you go. I'm this in a similar vein here. I quite consistently, I have a track open here, I have a track open over there, and I might have another one on my work laptop, for example. So I'm just kind of walking around the room doing 3 different projects at the same time. They're all coming to fruition, but it keeps that creative spirit going, because I'm not getting distracted with, okay, maybe I should compress this, or maybe that needs EQing, or maybe I could take that reverb out a little bit, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it helps. Well, for me, it helps my perspective as well. I get less drawn into one thing. I mean, you might say, if you're trying to criticize the approach, that maybe you don't get fully absorbed in the song that you're writing, but I don't have a problem with that. I feel the vibe pretty quick if it's happening, and if it isn't, I can change up. I find that chopping between them gives me that perspective of whether or not I think something is worth more time, and whether or not the tone of the tracks is actually consistent between song to song. It gives me that kind of perspective as well.
Yeah, I completely see what you're getting from it. It's like you say, it's all about the vibe in that sense. It's all about, you can latch back into it and pick up where, like, unlocking that memory, come back into it at any point,
Yeah, because music can do that. I mean, it's not like you're doing maths homework or something. You've got to get in the mood. It's something that just sort of happens if you're like, oh yeah, I'm in the mood for this. It just happens straight away. It doesn't take time. You're just there.
I get that.
So I don't find it a problem.
Completely. Smiley Arrow says, not getting distracted. I don't know if that's for me or for you. Not getting distracted with 3 songs open on 3 different machines. I think that's for me, actually, to be fair. Distracted or just keeping the attention where I can for as long as I can, I think is a good way of putting it.
Yeah, none of that save and load another one and wait a few minutes. It's just go over there. There's another song there. There's another one over there.
It's just like, where am I?
I kind of like
it. Exactly. If anyone has not listened to the album yet, I have put the link in the chat, and it's also down in the description below. Go check it out. Really fantastic album. It's been wonderful to work with you, Eonlake, in putting it out there.
Likewise.
It's been great, man. It's been absolutely great.
Working with your friends is one of the best things about this, really, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah, completely and utterly. Working with like-minded people, and we sit and we chat fairly regularly, and then we get to sit and work together on this, and it's really good fun. So thank you for bringing it to Audionautic. I look forward to the next one. Is there anything else that you would like to say before we go into the final section of our show for today?
No, just that I appreciate anyone who wants to give it a listen, or has given it a listen, or given anything that I've done any attention. I appreciate it all. I really do. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much. Wonderful to sit down and actually talk to you and put you in a corner and say, "Hey, talk about your album for an hour," because I know how difficult that is for you. So, well done. I really appreciate it. I hope that you guys listening back or listening live have found some insight into the way that Eonlake thinks and does his production. But yes, finally, Eonlake, we have a week ahead of us before the next show. What do you have in store? What do you have any plans, or do you have any plans? Or it's a better way of saying that.
Yeah, I'm messing around with droney stuff at the moment. I've been a bit of a stress head over the last few weeks. To the level almost back to COVID levels of stress headedness. So I'm combating that like any kind of ambient producer would do by doing drone music.
Great way of doing it.
And it struck me that all the stuff that I've done, I've never used the Lyra 8 for a drone track, which is absolutely insane considering that's what it does best. So yeah, I've got a date with that. And also the No Coast is really good for drones because of the wave folding sweeps you can do and so on. So I've got a head full of ideas. I've got a tray with toys and I'm just going to work through them, making, like we were talking about, lots of content to try and vibe off later.
As Daniel X said, making content is cost close to zero. So you're in good company.
Yeah, apparently, yeah. All this stuff just fell out of the sky. I didn't work for years to earn the money for it or anything.
Exactly. Yeah. It's yeah. So you should be thankful and grateful, Eonlake, if anything.
How about you, dude?
It's nice. Before that, I'm just going to say hi to Thomas. Hey, Thomas, nice to see you. No worries being late. There is no being driving when you're mean to. You are a wizard after all. At the end of the day, myself. Well, as I said previous, I've got this push 2 here. So I've got to spend the last month getting away from this desk and building the sketch station and working with the sketch station, and that's in place. I've also, like I say, taken part of this push 2. It's not mine. It's on. I'm learning how to use it, so I can go and teach with it next year.
Yeah, you can't really teach. Yeah,
I need to know how to use it.
you definitely do. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And I've fallen in love with it, so I'll be doing a lot of that. And I'm just amazed at I'm using it. I'm still got this guy over here. I'm still using
because it is a launch pad, isn't it, rather than a push 1, isn't it? I can't tell from here, but it looks like a launch pad.
This is the launch pad Mark III, and then down here we've got the push 2. So I'm using, but I've still used this for the drum pads and stuff, and I'm still kind of, mainly it's just because that's how I'm thinking.
Yeah.
But what is really good here is the mix. The mix as you go, add effects, add devices, add tracks, add chains.
There's nothing you can't do, and you can see even with the EQ, you've got you can see it.
I know,
brilliant.
and I love it, and I've me, I've always tried to get away. I don't want to go doorless. I like sculpting, same as you. I like sound design. I like all that stuff. I love Ableton. Great way of doing Ableton without staring at the screen in front of me. So I'm going to be exploring that. I'm going to be exploring that in my live stream after this as well. Push 2 big. It's quite chunky, I would say. It's bigger. It's bigger than the Novation. Oh, there you go. Eonlake has said it. But it's quite heavy. It's solid. It's a nice piece of gear.
Yes, it's one of those things that's reassuringly heavy when you use it, but it's just plain old heavy if you stick it in a bag and carry it around. But it is stick it in a bag sort of size. I think you could fit it in a rucksack, couldn't you?
Yeah, I think a bigger rucksack. I don't.
It'd have to be a wide one. Yeah.
Yeah, have to be a wide one. But yeah, that's where I'm at. And I've also purchased basically a DJ bag. And for this to go in a bag to create a portable setup. So I'm going to be playing with that as well as we're coming to summer, sitting in the park and doing some stuff. So at the same time, you never know. I'm also working the whole weekend, so you never know. Maybe I won't get to do that. So we'll see.
Never stops.
It's fine. It's festival season, isn't it? It's festival season, so it's a busy time of year. But yeah, that's what we're doing. So yeah, that's as far as we've got. Again, sadly we haven't had Sunwarper this week. We hope that you're
Get
feeling
well
better by
soon.
next week, bro. Yeah, I haven't seen you for 7 days, which is a long time for me. So yeah, thank you ever so much for tuning in, and we've just hit the 90-minute mark. So thank you for being here. Thank you for staying to the end. Thank you for giving us your time. The internet is a big place. Not everyone has a lot of time, so thank you for spending your time with us. We really appreciate it.
We do. Much
We do.
appreciated.
Exactly. One last thing, Spanish, but supermarket logo on your DJ bag to stop it looking attractive to thieves.
Yeah,
Well,
that's a
I'm
good
gonna.
idea.
Mine's already covered in cat hair, so that might be a good
Cat
start.
hair's good. Yeah, maybe you could get some not fragile tape. Put that around
Maybe,
it too.
yeah. Mm. Yeah. It's lovely to see you, Thomas. Don't worry if it's lovely to see you here, even if it is at the end. It's lovely just to check in with you, make sure you're
Always, yeah.
okay. Always come and say hi in the Discord. We'll be there for a bit, and I'll be going live after the show in about an hour. ASF Straight, peace to you as well. Thank you ever so
Peace.
much for coming in and saying hi. Really appreciate it, guys. I've got to do the outro. I completely forgot about that because Sunwarper sometimes does that. If we should even find it at this stage. But yes, thank you ever so much. We'll be there. We'll see you next week. Take it easy now. Bye bye.
Bye.